Hey, Roger, welcome to the show.
Jason, great to be with you today.
So, Roger, you do something called crisis planning. What is that?
Well, it's akin to crisis communications, but I think the simplest way is to say, rather than the crisis happening and responding to it, you're actually looking at scenarios and situations, trying to anticipate what's going on. And more importantly, not just plan for that crisis, but if you understand it, maybe you can mitigate the issue altogether. And that's really the ideal here. Let's look at issues, understand them, get those things out of the way before they become crises.
Yeah, and we see a lot of examples in the white-collar criminal world where, really if they got ahead of it, would have been better. I mean, recently we saw that whole Wells Fargo's case where, they had many people and many employees opening bank accounts for people who never wanted a bank account open. And it seemed like there was a culture there. What are the things that you do with the company to try to prevent some of those things?
Yeah, that's a classic example where there's sort of a systemic set of values in that organization. And there's a lot of talk these days about being authentic, and it's a little bit of a cliche almost these days. But being authentic is really starts at the top in the way that the company's behaving, the corporation's behaving, and the senior management. And it's taking a look at what are the things that are going to be important to us, and then standing by those things and behaving in a way that is consistent with your goals and your mission. Sometimes it's a matter of how is a single corporation, take a single situation, and maybe the senior management isn't handling it correctly, or they're going in a wrong direction, and all the other employees sort of see that and go, well, if they mean that, I think we can do that too. Sometimes corporations do things in a way that they think is being helpful. We worked for a bank years and years ago where a senior loan officer was doing state subsidized mortgages, but was giving them to some of his friends. Big problem, became a minor problem, became a big attorney general level investigation problem very, very, very quickly. It was interesting because we were brought in to handle the crises, but been doing some analysis with some of the employees. We interestingly found that the employees saw the behavior of the corporation as protecting this person, standing by this person, thinking they're doing the right thing. They're standing by their employee. The rest of the employees saw that behavior and said, I couldn't have gotten away with that. And it set an interesting tone. They realized it. We did a focus group. They realized they were sending the wrong message downward. But those kinds of things happen. It's one of the other reasons why when we do crisis planning, we go through a series of scenarios, and we usually test some of the assumptions. So we'll do not a big simulation, but more the testing is, if these things were to come up, how would we behave? So if we had a product recall situation, we would be working with attorneys like yourself. What should we do? What's the limit of our risk? How do we mitigate that risk? But you also start saying, what if, and what should we start doing in those equations?
Right.
And then if it becomes a major problem, that's really, frankly, the wrong time to be having conversations about what is truth, what should we do, what's our responsibility. By doing testing, by doing scenario planning, by running through those situations ahead of time, you have those conversations. Truth varies. When is it? How much? But you don't want to be in the middle of a crisis and have 10 people in a boardroom go, we're not having a conversation about a truth. We're going to talk about our stockholders.
Too late.
Maybe that's the direction you should be taking.
Right.
You want that conversation months ahead of time because it informs a behavior for the senior management, and that behavior informs the rest of the corporation. I won't go to your particular case, but if those employees had seen management behaving in a different way, they wouldn't have stepped up and frankly gone down the path.
Yeah, that's
they
too
were
bad.
Either directly or emotionally authorized to do what they were doing.
Yeah,
and it wasn't their fault.
Right. And that's a really important thing that you're talking about, right? Because obviously, that was a huge mistake that was made. But like where you were saying that when it's crisis communication, what happens is they're essentially in survival mode. They're not in a growth mode. That's not where any company wants to be. And Roger, we talked about kind of what you did, when people should be contacting you. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think that blends in really well with what we're talking about.
Sure. There are really two situations. One is when a company is going through some kind of change. they've acquired a new company, and maybe the new company, the employees coming in aren't aware of what's going on, or they were I think the example I gave you, they were in the widget business, but now they're in the digital widget business, right? But now they got cybersecurity and e-commerce issues and regulatory problems to worry about. So the market changes a little bit. So when there's a shift of change of some kind, that's a good time to be reviewing what your organization's doing. And I'll talk about some tools that exist already in that environment. The other reason typically to get us involved in a company's planning is when they've been through a situation that maybe they've been able to mitigate, maybe they've gotten past it, but they make a false assumption of, oh, we got past that, now we don't have to worry about it. Right. When you get past it, it's the time to start worrying about the next one. So maybe you're involved in a regulatory issue of some kind, and for the past 10 years, somebody in Congress or your local legislator or a regulatory body is putting forward a new reg that addresses the issue that you might be on the other side of. And that's been year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Year 7, you're still there. Well, that's probably a pretty good indicator that you should be addressing that issue now, because in year 8, 9, 10, and 11, it's eventually there. That reg is going to happen. Look at the cigarette industry, who went for years and years and years, winning every one of those cases until they didn't. And then you take a look at a company like a McDonald's, great company, for years and years and years had plastic and styrofoam and did not have a strong environmental base. And again, they kind of missed it, but they got ahead and said, this is going to get us eventually. So let's get ahead of it now. Let's be more environmentally friendly. Let's look at our materials, our recycle programs. Those are the differences between those two kinds of companies. If you see something that's going on that's just past you, that's a good time to bring us in and do some kind of, start a conversation, look at scenarios, look at situations that you think you may have liability in, and let's have a conversation to do some planning against that.
I mean, they're just playing with fire, right? And what I appreciate about you is that you have the ability to draw on your experience to let them know the regulations that can be coming out that could affect them, versus just kind of like blindly hoping, just like essentially blind hope, right? Like, it's not going to affect me.
Hope is not a plan. What's interesting, though, and I'm glad you raised it, Jason, is most companies are already doing all that kind of monitoring and collection. They know what's going on, but they don't look at it through the lens of outside stakeholders or regulatory issues. So, for example, any good company, whether you're doing Six Sigma net manufacturing or continuous process improvements, they're looking at their manufacturing processes. They're looking at their warranty rates. They understand the consumer complaints coming in. And if somebody's collecting that data, and by the way, typically that sort of sits at the manufacturing level, it doesn't get up to a C level.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. That data is being collected. And all of a sudden you say, when we added a new component, we're seeing a different problem, or in the parts that seem to be coming out of our Columbus facility seem to be an issue, or now that we've added something, we have a different regulatory liability. All of those kinds of things represent data that they're collecting. They probably have a formal, informal regulatory government affairs person, someone in Washington, someone who's part of a trade association where those issues are being discussed. It's time to bring some of those back in to say, yeah, it's not a problem yet, but it might eventually be. Exactly. It may even be a problem, frankly, that never is going to come up. And here's another problem that corporations have, unfortunately. At any given time, they've got all these issues, they're 20, 30 little issues percolating. They've got this stakeholder, they've got a product issue, they got local regulatory issues, national regulatory issues. And any corporation is going to say, what are the 3 things we need to worry about? Or those, they can't look at the 20 things. They just don't have the mental horsepower to do that. Nobody does, right? Yeah. What doesn't happen, though, is all of a sudden 2 of those kind of go whoop up the curve and become sort of a stakeholder consumer problem, and whoops, one of those launches up within about 6 months and becomes a regulatory problem, or God help you, a legislative solution coming up. And in hindsight, it's like, well, we saw it down there, but there were 20 of those down there.
Right.
So doing sort of a mental exercise on a regular basis to say, let's look at your sexual harassment policies. Let's look at your manufacturing issues. Let's look at what's changed in the organization. Let's do a very top level regulatory review of what you've got. And 90% of those are, I think we're okay, we're fine. and 5% of those are, we should probably be looking at those. And 2 of those are going to be, whoops, did we just miss something? And did we get lucky? How do we mitigate that? And how do we go down the line and mitigate some of those other issues before they become those problems?
Yeah, and hopefully if it is a situation where they don't hire you and it's just a whoops, it's just a smaller whoops that they can kind of pay their way out of, and that they don't have to hire a criminal attorney like me if they're really in violation of some federal statutes. So,
Right.
But those were some great tips. I'd love you to come back to do more case studies for us, but thanks for coming on today.
Sure, we'll sit together and do greatest hits one of these days. I think it'd be interesting for your audience. So let's spend